Hello, I am getting ready to set up an LXD container on my QNAP NAS that is relatively similar to the one that I have on my local machine. Problem is that last time I did it, I put 18.04 on the NAS and I'm using 20.04 on my local machine LXD. So what the heck am I talking about? You may recognize my icons generally lined up by the screens in which I use them, right? So this is a terminal, this is Jupyter, and this is a web browser. But lately I've been putting some other ones in between here because this one is actually a login to the Linux terminal, the LXD container running on my laptop that hosts it, right? So I could go screen ls and you can see my instance Jupyter, screen reattached to Jupyter, and you can see Jupyter Notebook is running here. That is actually the thing that's hosting this Jupyter session. And so that's this icon on my desktop here. Now I've been practicing with this icon on my desktop, which brings me to the instance on my NAS. This should do a login. Yeah, quickly and easily brings me in there. And I could, for example, lsb underscore release all and show you that this is 18.04. And then when I go over to the one that's on my actual laptop here, exit out of that screen session, lsb underscore release all, you can see I'm on 20.04 focal fossa locally and bionic beaver on the NAS. So where is that? That is actually going in through my web browser. I can go in through App Center. It's my NAS. You can see I'm upgrading my hybrid station, but that really shouldn't stop us. I close out of what am I on? All apps, my apps. My apps. I want my apps. What is this? Closed into a station subfolder, perhaps. I'm just going to close out of that. Go into App Center Fresh. And there we go. That's what I'm used to seeing. So here's ContainerStation. I will open ContainerStation. Now, reminding you, this is the web user interface to an actual physical computer that is not my laptop, called IKIDYA NAS. It's the IKID-NAS. Anyway, it has one container image running on it, and you can see the running containers going down here, right? So there's also the concept of images. So I have images. This is version Bionic. That you create containers from. So you create containers from instances of images that you keep local on your machine. And so I don't have one for 20.04, so I got to get one. You do that by hitting create. And then you can search all the images. I guess there's a very Docker bias in here, although they're trying to migrate people towards LXD. But I do want to search for 20.04, 20.04, enter. And then it's going to give you the choice between the Docker Hub and the LXD image server. This is Ubuntu's main image server. When you're using LXD without a Windows or without a web user interface, it's same thing. So there it is, Ubuntu, LXD, focal fossa, that's 20.04. It'd be nice if they wrote 20.04 here somewhere. I don't see that. You just got to know that focal fossa is it. So I'll install that. This only takes moments to pull it down. And so we will have another local image, and I am going to give it a different name. So we already have an Ubuntu there. This is going to be I'm going to just call it Ev because I've been going through Wizard of Oz and Wonderland references, and I don't think I've used the land of Ev yet, which is where TikTok is from. Not the app TikTok, but the Wizard of Oz character TikTok who does automation. And so much of what this is about is to move the automation that goes on here in Jupyter Lab over to a real location that can just run the code, and that'll be Ev, the land of Ev. Sure, we'll let it auto start, and we'll be turning auto start off on the other one. Host name will also be Ev, and we do want our network context to be network address translation, NAT, instead of a bridge, which would make like a whole other instance of a computer on the one network. When you have it as a NAT, it creates a nested virtual LAN. It's good for security context, but if you want to get into it, you need a pathway in. So any attempt I make to reach port 2222 will be forwarded to port 22 on the actual host. So I can SSH in by still going to 22 to get to the the actual QNAP hard metal hardware. I guess I don't know this. But if I want to get to the container, I can SSH into 2222, and that'll push me to port 22 on the container, and that will be my SSH path in. I want a shared folder, so I will select one of my shared folders. I guess that's add as opposed to create, right? I want my data folder. Oh, okay, so we put that in there. We select it. It's like my data folder. Mount point. I want it to be just data in my Ubuntu home directory. We will have to check on that because without, tilde. Okay, let's see what it says. The path must be absolute and start with a /. Oh, that's a bummer. So let's just try mapping that into the user directory then. That should be home/Ubuntu because it's LXD and the default user is always Ubuntu. Data. Can I do that? I can probably do that. And that relieves me of having a mount point, right? A mount point would allow different users in the machine to get in there, but having a mount point directly into a user is not the worst thing in the world. Let's try that. Create. Did not reject that. So we have to definitely check and make sure we have a data folder when we log in as Ubuntu. Now, this is kind of an interesting challenge because when you're doing it without the web user interface, you know what to do at this point. At least I have figured out what to do. You use the LXC command. The LXC command ships with LXD and is your API to get into this stuff. So I guess I created a container. It's not going to be, or it might be a running image. Let's see if it's a running image already, if it did the extra steps. Yeah, there it is. It's an image. It created the container. It created the image. We're going to see the image here. And it created an instance of that image. So here's focal, here's bionic. It created an instance of the focal under containers. So and it's running. Look at that. The square that was gray before now is green. So they're both running, and that's a little bit of an issue. That means it's been issued its own IP now, separate from this one. And they both have the same network translation rule. So this is not one I want running while this one is running. In fact, let's hit stop on this. I'm not going to delete it yet because I might want to get into it for comparison's sake. And in fact, with that having stopped now, it probably killed the this one. See, the process exited, and this will not be able to go back into that instance of LXD on the NAS because I powered it down. That container isn't there. So the attempt to get into port 2222 was connection refused. Now, the connection was refused, even though it was forwarding the traffic over to this one at this point, because there's not an open SSH server running here. There's a number of things now that have to be set up. It's not just plug and go, because these images are so very minimal. And if it wasn't through a web user interface, if I was local on the machine, it's really obvious what to do next. But going through a web user interface, you got to kind of piece it together. So I do know from experience that you can click on the actual name here, And it brings you into this interface where if you had the login, you could log in here, but the default username, or the default password for Ubuntu, I don't think is set. So UBUN Ubuntu for login, password, nothing, maybe? No, right? So we'll try one more. Ubuntu. Nothing. So you got a unique login problem here for logging in as Ubuntu. Now we might try root. Let's just try the word root there with nothing as the password. Again, problems getting in. So what do? Well, they do give you this terminal button here, which is different from this one that popped up automatically. Whereas this is a console. Consoles have logins. You need to log in as a user. A hard terminal connection makes it believe that you're on a terminal directly connected to the machine. So bin sh, privileged, if you will. Now my language would have probably been different. I've probably used a console for the privileged one and a terminal for the less privileged login one. But look at that. Look at that. You've got the little tic-tac-toe or the hash symbol. So I'll do Control+ to make that a bit bigger, or bring it up to, the browser's now at a large percentage. But if I ls, you can see we're home in root, which has nothing in it. If I really wanted to, I could cd to / and then do an ls and show you the very familiar layout of roots. cd ~/ brings you home, and then a pwd shows you your path to home. So you're in a pretty privileged spot here, and you are in fact logged in. lsb_release should work. And there we are on 20.04. But because of the firewall configuration and being logged in as root, I'm not going to do the, well, I don't think the apt, well, okay, so I jump ahead of myself. We want to use this privileged login context now to do PASSWD, which is password for Ubuntu. We want to set a password for Ubuntu. What's its new password going to be? Foo, because it's the one I always think to try. Foo2, password updated successfully. Now we should be able to exit out of this one. Should probably close the tab automatically. If it doesn't, you just close out of it. Oh, we bring our zoom all the way back down. We tied our zoom level together for, okay, there's 100%. That's actually a bit small. I must have been using higher than 100% for the sake of you video people. All right, so now we should be able to attempt to log in as Ubuntu here, password foo, and there we are, we're in. See that? And now we want to see if we have network connectivity. I don't think we do, and if we don't, I'm going to fix it. ifconfig. Yeah, it's not there. We're going to need net tools, but we can try doing sudo apt update and see how it says 0% and is stuck at working. There's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem here, because without being able to find out your IP readily, which I do through the ifconfig program, it's kind of difficult to add the firewall exception rule. So let's go do some firewall stuff. You can see this failure resolving shows no network connectivity. It doesn't have DNS, right? So the virtual network thing it tried to set up internally didn't work, because communication between inside of the ziggurat box and outside is failing, right? All these failures. So what we're going to do is, I guess I'll minimize ContainerStation, because we will be coming back to it. That'll be a good before and after. And we'll go into QU firewall. We'll open the firewall. And firewalls are not so easy to turn off. It will prompt you for login, which I actually will do. So I'll turn off the NAS firewall protection temporarily in order to install a few things. And you'll see I have it locked down pretty tight, right? If I go into this rule that I made. There's only 4 rules, and this is the key one: deny all traffic, right? See this? Where's that 4th rule? It's saying there's a 4th. I thought I only had 3. So, deny all traffic under like almost all conditions, with the exception of this range of IPs, which is devices on my internal network. This is my internal network IP range. There's a set of machines there. And then this is the first IP that was issued on the virtual LAN internal network of the container network. So I can probably just add another for 7.2, or I could probably use the trick here where I did the range. If I edit this, so there's an IP range. I did from 0 to 254. That's like the whole range. So I should be able to edit this and allow any machine on my container network to come through. Instead of a single IP address, we switch to IP range. Oh, let's go back to IP address again. Does it remember? 10.0.7.2, right? 10.0.7.2, so we switch it to range 10.0.7 from 1 to 10.0.7.255, right? I don't know what my subnet mask is, but this will allow anything on that internal container virtual LAN network through. So we hit apply on that. We hit apply on that. Yes. Oh, I didn't even have to turn the firewall off in this case, so I don't even need to do the login. I just changed the rules a little. Probably should have prompted me for the password for changing the rules too. That's pretty privileged. But my user account probably gave me that level of privilege without login. All right. So we go back to ContainerStation and we try sudo apt update again. Look at how much better that's working, right? Whereas it kind of timed out there before, it now can get through. So when you're using containers, even at home on your home network, and you've got firewall issues to deal with on whatever machine is hosting the container, sudo apt upgrade. Oh, it says all packages are up to date. There is nothing to upgrade, so that's great. So I've got a very new instance of Ubuntu running here. So I can apt install things. Sudo apt install net-tools, right? So if you don't have ifconfig, net-tools is what you want. It'll put netstat and a bunch of other things on there. Doesn't take long, but now you can do ifconfig. And when you do that, you can look here, 10.0.7.4. So I've got my IP. I'm logging into .4. And chances are it'll hold on to that IP for a good long while, but now I know how to get into it, right? So we go over here, and you will remember, this one is just a distraction. That's where I was doing some Git updating. You will remember my attempts to use this here, the NAS LXD, doesn't get in anymore. It times out because the machine I was using, the container, isn't there anymore. So let's just edit that to attempt to log into a different IP than it was previously using. We right click on it, we go to properties, and then we find in this lovely little command that I have here, am I doing the right one? Oops, now I'm typing in there. I'm going to close out of that for a second and really make sure I'm on the right one. I think I am. Properties. Oh yeah, that's right. It's an attempt. It doesn't have access to the virtual LAN yet. So it actually attempts to get in at 192.168.1. Oh yeah, the host machine. Yeah, the host machine's IP, right? That same host machine IP is the one that should get me into the other machine. So the question is why it doesn't. Why is it timing out now? Is actually OpenSSH not being there, all right? right, so let's go take a look. One last thing through the web user interface before we have a dedicated terminal. Services, service. Yes, service status all. This might not be the system D way of doing it. This stuff has been sort of deprecated, but it's so easy to remember that it's nice to look at. You can see the services that are running here, right? Service space minus status hyphen all. There's other ways that this is done these days under system D, but for the sake of adding OpenSSH or SSH server, I find it really helpful to type this first as a before and after. You can see nothing that looks like OpenSSH or SSH server is actually listed here. We need to change that, and I am going to just do a quick check on apt. That's the browser wars. They moved my cursor. Microsoft moved my cursor to make it a Bing search instead of a Google search. Okay, this is they did it again. Sudo apt install OpenSSH SSH server, I think. OpenSSH hyphen server, I think. Yeah, things are starting to agree. OpenSSH hyphen server, right? So you want to sort of survey the landscape to make sure that you're not doing the wrong thing. Oh yeah, that's the web browser. Sometimes you get lost, right? So this is sudo apt install. Now this is the before, nothing having to do with OpenSSH. OpenSSH hyphen server. That's the magic words. So even when you're in container land and you pull down kind of a default container, you still really don't have everything you need to just like log into that container and use it as a headless server. But we can make it so. This is the process of installing OpenSSH server, which I'm doing now still through the ContainerStation. This is software. Now I remind you, this whole thing here that you're looking at, while it's in a web browser, it's just the web user interface to a physical piece of hardware I have, a QNAP server that has a few hard drives in there and enough processing power to run some rudimentary stuff like a mini version of Kubernetes, which is a host to containers and virtual machines and such, but it's very mini because you're not really running a Kubernetes instance. That's much more complicated. So now we just run that command again to list all services. See that? SSH has been added as a server. That's your before and after. Does that mean that icon is going to work? Why, yes, it probably does. Although the first time logging into that particular machine, it will probably have some sort of challenge prompt. Look, connection refused. All right, so think. Do we need to modify things on that OpenSSH config, perhaps? Think it through. We're attempting to connect to the exact same IP as before. It's the internal network IP to my NAS server. And all attempts to connect to it should port forward it to port 2222. And that should be, that's port forwarded to just port 22, which is a default port that's listened to by SSH. So there may be one more thing we need to do here in order to make it work. And that's usually under etc. So we go into cd/etc. Is it /etc, or that's the root one? And that never modifies that stuff. It's usually user bin. Let's do user ls cd. It's usually user local cd local ls cd etc ls. Nothing there. Let me take a look at my notes. I usually note this stuff. Open SSH -server get rid of the password challenge. Oh, look at that. Sudo vim etc SSH. So it's a from root SSH. No, that's okay. And then we restart it. It wasn't necessary. But we had to chmod idrs. Oh yeah, that was from before. I think I have that taken care of. Okay, so it seems to me what we may have to do is edit ssh_config. So here's where we find it. I was wrong looking for the local one. It's from /etc ls. And from in there, it is SSH, CD, SSH. And from in there, it is SSH_config. Vim SSH_config. Now there's also a .d there for a directory, SSH config and config-d. I'm going to see what file that brings up. Okay, so there is a file there, right? And then password authentication, no. Challenge response authentication, no. Challenge response authentication. It's not a very big file. Maybe it's in the underscore, it's at the .d file. Let's double check its settings. Advanced settings. NAT. Oh, look at that. The port forwarding is not set up. Even though it's set to NAT, the port forwarding I had set up did not take. I didn't save it, something. Host machine attempts to connect to port 2222 should be forwarded to port 22. Apply. I'm glad I double checked that. You can see through this little console, it's doing some service restarting, which bodes very well for when we go back out here. We double click this again. There, see? All right. You're like, oh, well, that's not working. But look, communication is happening. Warning, remote host identification has changed. It's possible that someone's doing something nasty, right? Blah, 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 blah. So we're not really doing something nasty. It just knows that this current machine has different codes for that remote machine. And I can fix that. I can fix that by causing a re-fingerprinting. So you might not really notice it, but these things really are going in through PowerShell. So if I were to go to properties, you can see that the program that's being run here is in fact PowerShell, Windows Terminal.exe, WT.exe. And so we can bring up just PowerShell. And that allows me to go into my .ssh directory. cd.ssh ls. Here's all the different things in my SSH, right? It's not that much harm for you to know the names of my keys, but known hosts is where the problem is occurring. Now, I don't want to show you the known host file, but I can allow the prompting to start to reoccur. So I can just remove, which is a delete, known hosts, right? So I just deleted that file. It's not there anymore. So without the known hosts being there, now when I click this, it no longer has that problem with that remote machine no longer matching the fingerprint of what used to be at that IP, right? SSH doesn't like you connecting in to machine where fingerprints have changed. It thinks bad stuff is happening. So we just answer yes now, where that wasn't provided before. And the password foo. And there we are, logged in. I need to type foo. That's a shame. I wonder if I can get rid of the password prompt entirely. There's ways to do that. I had that on my last time I was doing this, but there you can see Ubuntu at ev. And we can do lsb_release. Oh yeah, I have to do --all. You can see we're now on 20.04, and I won't bore you with the next step, but now we do want it to be up to date. I'll get rid of that final password challenge later some other way. The icon that I'm using should probably actually do it, except it's using username and password for login instead of SSH keys. So there's some SSH keys tricks I can do to make it so that it doesn't challenge me again. But sudo apt update. Oh, all packages up to date. How about that? So when you create a new image from an LXD container, that is one of the benefits. Ubuntu Canonical keeps those images quite up to date. So isn't that nice? I can log into my remote machine now with this icon. Password challenge foo, but I can get rid of that password challenge. I'm pretty confident. And I can also log into LXD on my local laptop. So this window here, which is about to come up, is an LXD container on my local machine. And then my local machine, and this is a brand new created LXD container on my physically separate, but still inside my home, cloud-like machine. So here's Ubuntu at Jupyter, and Ubuntu at EV. So I'll be doing a number of other little things to get these two Linuxes into even more parity. They're both the same version of Linux. They're both under LXD, but this one has a Python virtual environment set up and stuff like that. So nice colored prompt. So I'll get them into better parity, and that'll be on the next video. Thanks for joining me. That has been setting up an LXD container on a network attached storage, network application server, in my case QNAP, QAP NAS. Yep, there you go. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you in soon. Don't forget to subscribe.